So we're going to start off with Vint Cerf, and again, the bios are in the program.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, I'm not going to, go into that, other than, Vint is a chief internet evangelist, right, at Google, and one of the fathers of the internet. And so thinking about the journey that we've seen with the internet, and now we're looking at AI. We're looking at the trends that Bill talked about. How do you think about this, and where does the lessons learned from the internet apply now to AI, and what's needed to achieve the vision that Bill talked about?
So the first thing I would observe is the question I ask all of my engineers when they start doing any kind of design: what could possibly go wrong? And I think we didn't entirely appreciate what could possibly go wrong in the internet in the earliest days of development, because we were focused on just trying to get it to work at all. The corollary to that is, what could somebody do to make something go wrong, which is a more difficult and scary prospect, because you have to design systems to resist deliberate interference. So I think with regard to the communication system, connectivity is everything in this game. If you don't have connectivity, you don't have all the data centers communicating with each other, you don't have the customers talking to the data centers and the applications. So preserving connectivity is super important, not only for all the internet-based applications, but also for artificial intelligence, because in a sense, we're going to rely on AI agents being able to communicate with any other AI agent anywhere in the environment, which is what we assumed would be important just for computers talking to each other. Now it'll be agents. One of the cautionary elements in all of this is that the more effective these things are, the more useful they become, the more we depend on them because of their convenience and their power. With dependency comes risk, and the risk has to do with resilience. And when things are singularly important to us, when they don't work, there are all kinds of side effects. I would suggest, just for your amusement, to consider what your day would be like when you get up and your mobile doesn't work. And I would guess for most people you would not have a great day, because we're so dependent on the variety of things that those devices can do. So the resilience of the internet, data centers, and the communication, I think, is reflected in the AI space, or will be reflected in the AI space, with the same order of dependency and probably an increased order of risk. So the risk factor here, I think, has to do with the fact that the AI systems that we're using today could not be characterized as ultra reliable. And they get trained on information whose provenance is not always clear. And the training process is naive, in the sense that it ingests anything and builds a model of whatever it was it ingested, and then uses that to generate output. But it isn't clear whether there's a great deal of filtering in the creation of the models, hence the hallucinations and the incorrect output. And the part that is so beguiling about all this is that the output is stunningly convincing because of the quality of speech or the quality of writing. Now just multiply that by all the modalities that are available: imagery, video, audio, and text. So I think we are entering a period of high risk of dependence on these technologies that have vulnerabilities that we probably don't fully appreciate. I'll stop there, but it seems to me that it gives one thought.
And consistent with the conversation we had on the stage last year about the importance of resilience.
Yes, yes.
And so we'll come back to that. And I know we'll get, to Troy some of the questions and issues that you've raised that are similar, right, in a slightly different context. But Ellie, you have written, 35 plus books. 37. The professor corrects me. You're not counting. And the latest one is on media and video. And when you look at, AI, you look at video, you look at the trends, the impact on industries, and what kind of digital infrastructure is needed. How do you think about this in the context of, what you've seen and where you see things going over the next several years?
Thank you very much. We had a terrific introduction by Bill, which kind of basically already said everything that we have to say. So the question really is what kind of uses will AI have, and how will it affect things? And here, I'd like to say something about video. Video kind of doesn't get quite the same attention as, let's say, new drug developments and healthcare delivery and all kinds of nice, sexy stuff. But the reality is that, depending on whose numbers you take, either 65% or 82.5% of internet traffic is video traffic already today.
Yeah.
And so the question is, how will this kind of trend? Because that's really the traffic, and that's the processing data center type work in clouds in the future. The next generation of video, the fourth generation, first being broadcast, second cable, and it's a multi-channel, third one is streaming, but the fourth one is introducing various technologies that we already have, such as immersion, such as interactivity, gamification, payment and other mechanisms with blockchain. There's a whole range, virtual reality, metaverses, all these things that got a lot of hype. They didn't really take off all that dramatically at all. But AI has the potential of kind of weaving them together, making them more convenient, making them coordinated. Because people, when they watch video, they want to lean back. They don't want to be too active. Some do, but not all. And so AI can do that. And as it does that, it will generate more traffic and more processing. The traffic part is actually solvable. By my calculation, it's going to require, with compression, et cetera, about 10-fold increase in transmission capacity over 10 years. That's a manageable 17% CAGR type per year. It's the processing, though. The processing that is required for, say, real-time rendering of 120 frames per minute, 8K immersive type video is extraordinarily high. It's just orders and orders of magnitude more than we have today. That will be, now you can kind of squeeze this in a variety of ways, compressions, and the technology, of course, improves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even so, the required processing capacity is going to have to rise enormously to make this into a mass product. That is an opportunity as well as a challenge. And the challenge, obviously, is to build it, to invest in it, to have the manpower for it, the human resources, to have the environmental issues, the energy issues, and not affecting local electric rates in the process. So all these things will have to be dealt with, the regulatory environment. And so I would say the driver of the next generation of the internet will be the next generation of video.
So that's actually, so I won't say contrarian, but a really interesting viewpoint, analogous to thinking about it as, the consumer driver is going to be, in terms of consumption, video, but Vint, you may want to.
Well, I wanted to ask Ellie a question, because there are various kinds of video. When we started watching streaming, for a while, it wasn't clear whether we would need to increase the total capacity of the network to allow the same video to be streamed multiple times. And then we got content distribution networks to try to reduce the transnational capacity requirement. But that's a kind of passive thing where it's the same video being transmitted. When you get to video conferencing, on the other hand, you're generating the video in real time. And so there's a lot more going on. Do we have any idea how much of the video that's currently being transported is passive CDN stuff versus video conferencing, which has to be sourced from wherever that video is initiated? And so do we know what that ratio is? I think the AI stuff that you just mentioned will be kind of like video conferencing in the sense that it will be generated in real time. And that does require more transport.
Absolutely. I don't have the numbers, maybe you have them. But clearly
that's homework for the
it's
students.
kind of a significantly increase in requirements. So many people will have already become producers, not only consumers. Many companies have become, not media companies, have become media providers as a byproduct, starting with marketing, but kind of really creating connectivity with their potential customers in some kind of a lifestyle type things, which does not really sell, it tries to engage. And so these things will be increasing, and so in the future, every company, in a way, I'm obviously exaggerating, every company will become a media company of sorts, and every company will become a tech company of sorts, because they are not just recipients, but they're also providers.
Generators, yeah.
Yeah, and user-generated video, right? I mean, YouTube is probably right now the largest streamer, right? Which is not what you think about.
We just crossed 1 trillion videos stored away in YouTube. 1 trillion videos. Wow.
YouTube has become, according to Nielsen, the largest provider of video by eyeball time. 14%, almost 14%. Disney, the second one, is only but 10%. Wow. Netflix after that, and then kind of the traditional media companies, the Fox and Paramount, etc., at 7 or 8%. So Google is there ahead.
I realize we're preventing Troy from getting a chance to jump in here, but
I'll also say is that, to Bill's point in one of the slides around the spending on fiber and subsea cabling shows that it's probably going to be a rounding error. So I think the investment is going to go there where we probably will not have any limitations when it comes to the network side of things, where majority of the investments has to go into the energy policy and data centers and the servers that go along with that.
Yeah, but I think with Ellie's point, though, in terms of the processing and storage, I mean, the question is, how much of that is going to be traditional cloud CPUs versus the focus that we now have here with the data centers, with the GPUs, with processing, the need for, the shift to water-cooled, silicon. That's being driven by currently the AI investments, training of large language models, the agentive AI, the inference. But, Ellie's saying there's a sleeper effect that may be actually as large, if not larger. We're certainly driving much of that from video, but the question is then how much of that is going to be, if it's tied back to AI, again, huge data centers, digital investment, digital infrastructure, that's going to look a lot like the digital GPU infrastructure for AI, but it's going to be, consumer driven by video. That's an interesting question. That's a little different. But
well, hello? I'm just thinking, how much video can we consume? I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet, but they probably only consume video one at a time. So the real driver may turn out not to be the video necessarily, but imagine how many agents could be created and could be interacting with each other, billions of them. And so it may very well turn out that the big driver will not be people consuming video, but rather agents talking to each other on behalf of the humans who have these agent robots at their disposal.
That's right. And once the agents talk to each other, then the question becomes, and that affects media companies and the video, why do we need advertising? Or do we need advertising less? Because the agents buy and sell from each other. So why do you have to persuade an actual human being when you have to persuade the agent?
Oh, because what you need to do is to provide the agent with the information that lets it decide whether it wants this product versus that one. So there'll be algorithms and the moral equivalent of SEO, except to convince an agent that you should buy this thing instead of that thing.
That's right.
God, what have we done?
So, yeah, it's a different way of thinking about it.
We're starting getting into consciousness here.
Yeah.
This
But
is,
I want to shift for a moment, Troy. You're currently, you were at Oracle, you're back at Oracle as an SVP, you're looking at long-term strategy and working with the teams building out the infrastructure there. But you also have been in government. And when you were in government, you were at the Food and Drug Administration. And you were focused on, using AI to develop new applications that would benefit people in the healthcare industry, but also very concerned and focused on the need for guardrails. Healthcare is critical, and you can't mess around with that. And so, your perspective is, as bringing to the conversation, from a policymaker perspective, what were you concerned about, and what are you concerned about now, and how do you see what has evolved over the last year or 2 years, but the last administration and this administration, but much of the agendas on AI promotion and AI looking at guardrails, is similar, but there are differences. So how do you think about that?
well, I'm still trying to figure out how I got myself on the stage with these two esteemed gentlemen. And I've written a couple blogs on this issue to Eli's 37 books. So, and I'll also say this entire thing is a sleeper effect. Like, whatever we want to say today is probably not going to be valid tomorrow. And that was the realities that I was having to deal with in the government, particularly in the policy space of things. But, when this topic came about and I started thinking about 2030, my initial and very honest response was like, I have no idea. And you can look back 2.5 years is when ChatGPT 4 came out. So think about where we were 2.5 years ago versus where we are today. And some of the numbers that I'm having to deal with on kind of the scale of the data centers, I've never experienced anything like this. And we've had obviously the scale there, but not this quickly. And so when I was kind of thinking about this issue, I looked at the AI executive order of both of the administrations. And if you remove the deregulation versus regulation, kind of the tone out of it, and you look at just the substance, they're actually highly complementary. And so if you look at Trump's, it's really around industrial policy. Like, how do we actually enable AI through industrial policies? And that's energy and data center construction and fiber. Now, it's a little bit harder. I spent 10 extra days in administration to look at the AI executive order that they were going to coming out. So I was supposed to leave with the administration. And my comment was, this is the right idea. The problem is that the federal government doesn't control often the energy policies in the United States. And so to Bill's point of view of nuclear investments in China, it's just not going to happen here because the states are either responsible or there's actually local governments that are responsible. And this is the complexities of the United States. So you have deregulated markets, regulated markets, and then you have markets that have both, like states that have both, like California, for an example. And then if you look at the Biden's executive order, really it was focused on things like standards development, guardrails, and governance, something that I think it's becoming even more so important here. And the analogy that I often use was, how do we ensure that AI is working for us and not on us or against us? Mm-hmm. It's an interesting concept because right now, and I was really focused on healthcare, and that was really a big consideration. And so that investment still needs to be made significantly, but the problem is that it's an evolving concept. And so what the target is, when the target is constantly moving, you ask yourself the question around, well, which one I'm trying to satisfy? And In the government, what we did was we looked at the current standards that had been published at that point when I was in the government, and there were about 220 standards documents floating around, most of it from educational environments and institutions. And I could safely say that we had no standards. And so what we try to do is find commonality in all of those standards and end up creating an AI lifecycle management that you all could look at it, because we took the software development lifecycle approach and we applied it to artificial intelligence, particularly on generative AI, because predictive AI was slightly different and we had to think very differently of that. And so I still think that's really an investment that it has to be done through public-private partnerships. And historically speaking, we've had public-private partnerships creating internet, GPS, open source. And so I don't think that we should be shying away from that, because you have to think in terms of both issues around the actual use of it, but also the safety aspects of artificial intelligence. The other thing that I want to actually also talk about in this context is that often we talk about the product innovation. And so we're talking about how do we actually innovate products, how do we incorporate AI into products, some of the industrial policy innovation. But what we don't talk about is process innovation around how do you actually think about what we do, either in the professional environment or in our personal lives, and say, how does this integrate into what we do, and can we do it better? And often, I was more focused on the medical side of things, but taking an AI, or let's call it agentic AI, and trying to integrate into a workflow that had been around for 50 years was probably the wrong way of looking at it. Like, you're just essentially adding yet another either application or a step into the process of that. And so I think as an industry, we have to look at this and say, no, how can we use this effectively while completely reimagining how we do something, either industrial specific issues or, again, in our daily lives. And so I still think that's an investment that has to be made. And right now, the strategy for a lot of the generative AI companies has been, here's a cool new functionality, let's just apply it to anywhere and everywhere. Whereas a traditional product management was, what problem are we trying to solve, and how do we actually either optimize it or modernize it? And so I think that is going to probably start happening, because it's also very expensive. And so I think industries and companies within those industries are going to have to be a little bit more strategic around the use of it, the application of it, the integration of it, and then, of course, the ongoing transformation of their corporate policies and workflows.
Yeah, and Vint, had started off also talking about.
Well, actually, I wanted to follow what Troy had mentioned. I'm just thinking about how the agentic concept introduces opportunities for process innovation. A very simple, almost trivial example of this is the difference between using a JAWS screen reader for someone who's blind and trying to understand what's on a website versus having an interaction with an agentic AI to get a problem solved or to get a task done. That's a significant, it might sound trivial, but it's a significant transformation, because you're now having a discussion about solving a problem as opposed to trying to figure out what the hell is going on the screen. I can easily imagine some of the standards, many of you must know about this, the A2A, agent to agent, and the MCP, which is the model, I forget what the MCP stands for. Did anybody remember what that is? It's Model Context Protocol, I think is the correct word. There are probably going to be a variety of other technical standards that will surround the implementation of these agentive systems. So I think your intuition is right, that there will be significant transformations in process logic as these AI systems enter into the picture. The scariest part, of course, is that they might not get it right. And you remember the little game that we used to play where you'd whisper in somebody's ear and they would whisper what they thought they heard into the next person's ear, and then you get to the end and whatever it is that comes out wasn't anything like the thing that started. I keep imagining these chains of agents interacting with each other. All I needed was transportation to get from A to B. When the 25th agent gets done, a Ferrari shows up on my front doorstep. Now, for some people, that'd be pretty cool, but that might not be what you had in mind. So I worry a lot about that. You look like you're about to levitate out of your seat.
Well, I thought kind of in the presentation before, we saw kind of the huge impact, the numbers of investment in the sector, which dwarfs the infrastructure investments in pure transmission. I mean, to the extent that the numbers are so large that even though the rest of the economy was slowing down, this kind of like really kind of raised it up. It's like a macro effect of the data center business, and these investments are just enormous. And they've given the United States, A, that macro effect, and B, also that global soft power and economic power effects. But what goes up can also bring you down. So if there's now that kind of fear by equity markets and others, well, maybe this is not so hot. This is kind of, we don't see quite in the short term versus long term. It's always the problem of over expectations in the short term and underestimations in the long term, short term, long term, is that economic advantage of the United States versus some other countries, particularly China, is going to be reduced, and also it will drag down the entire economy. When it goes down because of that pessimism that kind of one sees now in the media.
By the way, that does lead to the question that we, again, wanted at some point introduce, and I think this is a good time, which is, where are we on the hype cycle, right? Because again, last year we were kind of on the upswing,
yes,
right? Are we still on the upswing, or are we, where are we, right? And then, Troy, you see this every day.
Yeah, maybe to Vint's point about kind of the use of this, and something that I still feel that we have to make some significant investments on governance. And, AI models, there are different risk levels of its use, and depending on, the impact of it, the potential impact of it, if it actually goes wrong, or if it's going right as well. And one of the things that we had worked on with NIST, and it didn't see the light of day, but how do we actually partner with the industries and industry coalitions to say, let's come up with a standard governance model. And the idea that we had was, look, not everyone is going to be as comfortable playing at different levels of risk, but the levels of risk shouldn't change. What should change is like you decide which levels you want to put, and here are the guardrails associated to that. That still needs to be done. And I think the industry has to really take ownership of this. And about the hype cycle, I don't necessarily look at it in terms of hype cycle or not, but it's kind of my last comment around, hey, let's just apply it to everywhere, and what's going to start happening is that let's be thoughtful around where we integrate this. And so I think there's going to be a normalization of that, just like with any technology around, okay, this is cool, but businesses don't operate on cool. They operate on, does this make financial sense for us to actually use this? And so right now, a lot of the use cases initially started with the consumer side of things, but the more that you integrate it into the different industries and different businesses, and then the more that you go up on the risk level, there's going to be some thoughtfulness around its implementation and integration. So I don't necessarily look at it in terms of whether this thing is hyped or not. I think it's going to be more a normalization around what are the best practices of integrating this technology into what you do while you're also transforming the business itself.
Yeah, I really like the way you put that, Troy. And some of you will notice that the self-driving cars, or cars with various assistance levels, have like 1 to 5, and the 5th level is completely independent, like the Waymo cars. And below that, it's a driver assist thing, and then there's level 0 where you have to do everything. So the idea of how much risk are you taking applying these technologies to a particular process is very important. In Europe, I think there's a general sensitivity to risk levels, and the idea is that if it's medical diagnosis or treatment, that's a high-risk activity, and in the European view, you should demonstrate that you have taken steps to mitigate the risk of using the technology that way. And so risk mitigation may turn out to be a really important thing to demonstrate if you want to be seen as a responsible provider of AI-based technology.
Well, Vince, Vint, when you started all this mess,
Well, thank you very much.
did you think, or did you want to have somebody in the government say, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong, and there will be people abusing it, and cybersecurity, and we have to build in guardrails and governance, which are all kind of euphemisms for regulation. Couldn't one just kind of worry about problems when they actually emerge and then regulate them instead of that ex-ante type stuff?
So you're emulating my favorite distinction between the American point of view and the European point of view. In the European point of view, something might go wrong, we must regulate. In the American point of view, something has gone wrong, we must regulate. And I confess to you that I would not have appreciated a lot of over-regulation of the internet in the early days, because frankly, we had no way of knowing what could go wrong.
Yes.
Now we know better, and we do know the kinds of things that can go wrong, and we want to pay attention to that. In the case of AI, the reason that I think there is a tendency towards a desire to do some kind of guardrail and regulation is that the applications that we're contemplating just seem to be far more portentous, have the potential for substantial damage. Now, somebody could jump up and say, well, you know, you should worry about, or should have worried about, social media and all these other things that we believe in some cases cause harm. I don't think we were able to imagine all of these things. Now that we've had experience with the internet, our ability to imagine what could go wrong with the AI world is probably refined, and that makes us a lot more cautious.
Yeah, but not all applications are created equal in terms of the risk levels, right? And so, you know, if I'm using AI, right, by the way, DoorDash, right, food delivery, right, they are big adopters of AI in supply chain, food acquisition, food preparation, picking up delivery, know your customer, right? Very, and they are deploying it and getting real benefit. That's very different than on the healthcare side.
Well, but that's more predictive. That's more predictive application where you're trying to model a statistical system as opposed to the generative AI, which we're...
No, that's right. But,
oh,
but
okay.
when we talk about AI,
Yes.
it has this wide range
yes,
of
very
applications,
important.
right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we use these two words together,
Yes.
right? And it means different things. And you know, Troy,
Yes.
you know, so put it in the hierarchy of risk, but it's also, you know, the resources, what's being done.
Yes.
And it all tends to get lumped together, right? And I think that we need to begin to think about those kinds of distinctions, and where do you worry about it, all right? And where can you just let it go?
Yeah, what I'm incredibly worried about is that we conflate governance with regulation. And I was talking more around internal governance of a company deciding to actually integrate this stuff. And so, you know, I tried to be pragmatic when I was in the government, where I was like, okay, I'm going to try to influence a potential bill this way, but I'm also going to work with the industry to say, you need to also do some self-regulation, right? And so I think that's a very important part of any governance. And, you know, I come from the industry itself, and so when I thought about even regulation, I was like, often I would say a bill and a regulation that is unimplementable is just a piece of paper. And so whatever the things that I was working on was also taking that into consideration, and that's implementability both on the government side of things and implementability on the industry side of things. And so governance in the context of like what I was essentially talking about was really around a company determining the risk levels that they're willing to play at, and the guardrails associated to those risk levels, because like healthcare is different, right? And often I heard from hospital administrators and doctors, like, you know, medical liabilities. And so that was a big issue for them. And so this is why we had to educate hospital systems around, well, what are the issues that you should effectively be aware of in integrating, let's say, the difference between an administrative workflow using AI versus you're making medical decisions based on a multimodal analysis of a patient. That's completely two different things.
Well, I think part of the problem is that there are two hype cycles. There's the hype cycle of the industry and the technology and so on, but then there's also the hype cycle of public expectations, and that has been extraordinarily negative. So we're kind of like, woe us, all these horrible things that will befall us. And on some level, some of these things might be true, but with a small probability, some of them might be truer. But one of the reasons why people have been so uniformly around the world so scared about this is, in addition to the media hype that was the negative media hype, is that it speaks to a very kind of fundamental human fear of the other technology. If you look at through kind of literature and history and films, there's always this aliens, the technology that takes over, whether it's in the film 2001 or the Golem of Prague or Frankenstein's monster. There's always these things that we as humans fear. We kind of conquered the animals, the dragons, and we made up the dragons or whatever. Now we're making, in some ways, out these technology dragons that we have to slay before they even show up.
That's such a great analogy. Thank you. The technology dragon. Yes. Well,
I am not a dragon slayer. That's what you're accusing me of.
I think there is a very clear set of conclusions that I draw from this part of our conversation. One of them is the notion of responsibility, and responsibility to people who use products and services that a company makes and offers. And I think here your point about governance being a mix of self-governance out of survival and regulated governance. The part that I find the most concerning is introduction of regulation that's not implementable. It's like, are you okay? Can we get you an AI something?
It was the dragons that
right, yeah. So, imagine passing laws that are unenforceable. What happens is people lose their respect for the law because it's not enforceable. Same argument might be applied to how we deal with AI. And I like very much your point about parsing this term, artificial intelligence, to understand how varied it can be.
Yeah, and different approaches and levels of responsibility, need for guardrails, governance, and then who. And I love, Troy, your point about a lot of the governance is internal with on the companies, the developers. Mm-hmm. And at what point, right, is there, who validates that though, right? And where is liability, right? And that self-governance, right, at some point, migrates into sort of external governance.
We have a little under 6 minutes left, and I was going to suggest to you that since the idea was what's 2030 going to be like, we might want to pick a few other little bullets beyond the AI stuff.
Yes,
and
please.
So one bullet is data centers in space. There are several companies that are pushing that. Eric Schmidt's latest relativity space company is looking at that. One of the biggest problems there is getting rid of the heat. And it says space is a vacuum and it doesn't carry heat very well. That's the problem. And people say it's cold, and the answer is yes, it's also hot, and it doesn't care which, and you can't get rid of the heat. So that's a big issue. But as that will come in 2030, there will be some orbiting compute capability available. The interplanetary internet work that I've been flanging at since 1998 will absolutely be operational by that time. It won't be spanning the entire solar system, but we will be certainly on the moon and in low and geo orbit, and we will almost certainly be on Mars by that time.
Is that
not
still
people
working
necessarily.
with JPL?
I'm sorry?
Is that still the work with JPL on that?
Well, it's not just JPL. It's NASA, and ESA, JAXA, and CARI. The major space agencies are all implementing that stuff. So by 2030, you'll see a lot of that popping up. So those are my 2 points.
Well, if you're talking about space, in a way, AI obviates the need actually to send people, biological systems, into space and return them. Why don't we just kind of send out the AI module, or we can go further? We don't have to bring them back. We don't have to have any biosystems there. Of course, it's nice for humanity to have somebody there showing the flag on some planet. That would be great. But that's kind of mostly symbolic, really. It's a feel-good thing, and it'll cost trillions of dollars to get that good feeling.
I want to endorse this notion that robotic exploration has been incredibly effective in terms of learning science about the way the world works. So, yeah.
So, Vint, what are some of your other bullets and forecasts?
For 2030? No, you should let the other guys. I mean, you only have 3 minutes left.
We have 3 minutes.
We got plenty of time. I mean, I love the space idea. I'm not sure how the payload thing is going to work. I mean, racks are quite heavy. You're going to have to take 3 racks at a time, and that's not going to probably do it, based on kind of the scale of things. So that'll be very interesting. But I can see different, perhaps, form factors of a data center, maybe under the surface and water and things like that, where there's some conductive possibilities. So, but I think this is going to challenge the entire infrastructure. The way, and when I say infrastructure, I'm talking about like what we're here today. Right? This concept of where data centers exist, how we bring power to it, how do we transmit information from one location to another. I think that's going to fundamentally probably look slightly different.
You know, there's a very pragmatic observation listening to Bill this morning is we need more ships to do cable repair and cable laying because they keep getting cut. And some of it's deliberate, but a lot of it is natural problems like the tsunami or an earthquake under the water can cut the cables and does. And so we're building more cable systems to increase resilience of our own network at Google for that reason.
Yeah, what's interesting on that, we saw some data yesterday, Vint, that notwithstanding the significant increase in the number of cables, the number of cable faults has remained actually pretty constant, notwithstanding some of the, the news, headlines about cuts. And in fact, if you normalized by the number of cables and the number of faults, they've actually declined. Now, there's still
It doesn't feel like that where I sit, but anyway.
But yeah, but the telegeography guys.
There's the cybersecurity issues also.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And the 600,000 kind of attacks per day or something like that. So if that's the case, kind of humans cannot actually handle that. So who can handle it? AI can handle AI attacks. Similarly, when Vint, when you talked about the enforceability of any kind of rules, well, if humans can do it because they aren't enough, they aren't smart enough, whatever it is, that's too slow, the processes, AI again will be called in to help out, and sort of reg tech type thing. So we can see a future in which kind of like regulatory AI will kind of fight the bad guys AI and will kind of enforce the behavior of companies that might have some problems. And so that's perhaps the environment in which kind of like we humans, we kind of sit there and let the AI kind of keep order in the systems along the parameters that we set, and those parameters we have to enforce.
Congratulations, employees. Your AI overseer has arrived.
On the last word, Troy?
Yeah, I think when I think of 2030, there's going to be probably a different paradigm between, let's say, and recently I read this article around China approaching it where they're trying to create the world order around more pragmatic use of AI, whereas we're looking for general intelligence and things like that. But I kind of expect AI maybe accelerating some of the fragmentation that is already happening from a world order perspective, because I think that's going to end up driving more sovereign considerations for different countries to ensure that they're not challenged by or some of the things that really come with economic issues of AI use. So I can see the current world order that has been around since really 1944, 1945, truly accelerating the breaking of it.
So that's a great point. And then just as an ad for geopolitical questions that are going to be raised in some of the other panels, especially, I think, tomorrow. So we're out of time. The next panelists are over here. So I want to thank you very much for a very lively conversation. And a lot of fun. Thank you.